Welcome everyone, this is Just Restart, and I am finally back from having moved out and moved into this new place. There's still a lot to do with the setup and soundproofing, so bear with the echoing if you hear a lot of echoing, and there's so much to do, but I really want to get back into the swing of things, and the first thing I want to talk about is my review for Wolfenstein 2. Now this is only going to be a review of sorts because, well, one, there's so many reviews out there already, so I want to do something different, but also because it's been a while, there's already a lot of reviews out there, and I've experienced Wolfenstein 2, and I've noticed that there's quite a few similarities to Metroid Prime, and I want to talk about that. I think a lot of you Metroid Prime fans will see some of these similarities, and either A, may want to consider just getting the game, or B, maybe you will just kind of get a better understanding of what to expect for Metroid Prime 4. So let's talk about all of that. Now, I may bring up things that sort of relate to Metroid Prime as I go through my thoughts for Wolfenstein 2, but first I just kind of want to focus on that game, and then I'll get into some of the comparisons to the Metroid Prime series. So let's break it down into three different categories for my review for Wolfenstein 2. Gameplay, graphics and performance, and story. And, even though I said in that order, let's talk about story first. So in terms of story, I found myself incredibly engaged because the characters are very whimsical, the pacing of the story is very strong, and there's just so much to explore and learn about the game world, and it's awesome. Now there's one sort of pet peeve I have for a lot of first-person shooter games that are focused on story. A lot of times they have these cutscenes that you're sort of stuck, but you can still look around, and they go on for 5 to 10 to 15 minutes. And sometimes they do it right in the beginning of the game. So you play the game, and you can't even actually jump into the gameplay because you're just sitting around on a bed doing nothing for like 5, 10, 15 minutes. And that's really annoying, and I hate it. However, even though Wolfenstein 2 kind of does the same thing, I never hated it. I was never bored because the story is so engaging, the characters are so whimsical, and there's so much going on with the background story for this game. I loved it. It felt like watching a really good movie, and sometimes I'm pretty anal about my movies, so I feel like it's a very high compliment coming from me. So it's really good, and it's definitely like a high quality movie experience in terms of the story. I definitely think it's a very strong aspect of the game, if not the strongest aspect of the game. So now let's talk about the gameplay, right? So in terms of gameplay, it's great. The game plays very fast. It's I feel like the gameplay that I'm showing you guys kind of speaks for itself, but there's so much going on there. The shooting mechanics are incredible, and in some ways this game feels different from other first-person shooters because it's sort of, as you progress through the game, you obtain different platforming techniques, which may remind you of Metroid Prime because it also has a lot of different platforming techniques, and it just gives you a different way to explore the game world, and it's unique, but also, feels very a lot like other first-person shooters, but it's also faster, and it feels very natural and fluid, and it is great. Now, there's one thing I want to talk about that I think sort of sets apart the Switch version from the other versions, and that's the motion controls. This version, has motion controlled aiming, while the other versions do not. And I have to say that the motion controlled aiming is amazing. Like, if you play without it, I feel bad for you because it feels great. I know some people have their reservations about motion controlled aiming, but you're not just flailing around your controller. It's all about subtle movements that eventually become second nature. Now, the thing is, it makes the aiming faster and more precise, and like I said, it's all about subtle movement, so eventually it becomes second nature. Now you can play around with the skill, you can make it more intense, more subtle, and it works just fine. And whenever I turned it off, I felt like something was missing, and that just kind of speaks to how strong and how great it really is. So I don't think I would want to enjoy Wolfenstein 2 on any other system because of the motion controlled aiming. Now, even though, while I say I may only want to enjoy Wolfenstein 2 on the Nintendo Switch, I know there's a lot of people out there who may not care for motion-controlled aiming as much as I do, and will care more about the graphics and performance. And I have to say that in terms of graphics and performance, it is worse on the Nintendo Switch, but I'm sure a lot of you already knew that already. It's running at 30 frames per second as opposed to 60 on the other versions, but even though it's running at a lower frame rate, that frame rate it sticks to relatively well. I didn't notice any serious dips. I think it flowed and played fine the entire time. I didn't really notice any bad dips, is what I'm saying. It feels fine. Now, in terms of graphics, I think the game looks amazing. While it may pale in comparison to the other versions, it still looks like the other versions. It's just kind of like a little blurrier, and sometimes more blurry than others depending on the situation. But there's a lot of incredible lighting effects. The environments are destructible. There's tons of enemies and chunks of metal flying off them and crazy laser beams, and it all looks great, and it's just awesome. I think the game looks incredible, and while there may be some blurry moments, and I kind of only noticed them in the beginning, and after I played after a couple hours, I never really noticed again. I'm not saying they weren't there, but it's never that bad in my opinion, and the game looks great. And if it as a standalone Switch title, it looks impressive. So yeah, I think, objectively, Wolfenstein 2 is an incredible game. Now, in terms of, I guess, things that I don't like about the game, well, one, it doesn't have any multiplayer, which I don't need it, right? Because it's a single player focused game, but I know some people out there may want that. This game doesn't have it, so in case you thought it did, it doesn't have it. So don't buy this game thinking it's multiplayer, because there isn't. Now, the game only took me about 10 to 12 hours to finish, and that's kind of short, especially since it's a $60 game, and that's something that may turn off a lot of people. But here's the thing. The game encourages you to explore and learn more and more about the game world, and depending on how you play the game, you make certain decisions that will yield different character arcs and different events occurring throughout the game. So the game encourages you to play through the game multiple times. So while your first playthrough may only take 10 to 12 hours, this game could easily maybe push you to 20 to 30 hours when you're looking towards exploring and finding all the details and just learning more and more about this game and playing through different character arcs and seeing the different side stories that can take place throughout your campaign. So, the game has depth, but if you're not someone that likes to look for all the extra details, you only care to play through the story once, then just, keep that in mind. This may not be the game for you, but I think for a lot of people who are just looking for a really good story and great shooting and a great challenge, play this game. And especially because of the challenge, you're going to be encouraged to replay this game again, and then you can get different character interactions, different side stories when you do that. So I think it's great, honestly. I think the game has a lot of depth, and it's definitely worth the buck when you look at it from that perspective. Now, in terms of how this game compares to Metroid Prime, there's quite a few ways. Now, one, going back to the story, right, I mentioned how the game sort of encourages you to explore and learn more and more about the game world. This is something that also happens in Metroid Prime. With the scan visor, as you scan computer modems and dead bodies and artifacts, you learn more and more about the lore and the history of the world and the experiments and the research and sort of all the inner workings of the story and background for each particular Metroid Prime game. And the same applies to Wolfenstein 2. While there's not any scan visor, you will find logbooks, diaries, newspapers, dolls, and all these different things that will give you an understanding of the story in a different way. You'll learn about the history, that's going on with different characters in, during the events and before the events of, when the Nazis won World War II, and you'll learn more about different side characters. So the game really encourages exploration, learning more about the game world in these very subtle, informational kind of ways. So, it's something I really love, and if you're like me, who also loves exploring Metroid Prime and scanning everything and learning about the inner workings of the story, you can get the same sort of experience on Wolfenstein 2. Now, I mentioned earlier how, there are some platforming techniques that you can get in Wolfenstein 2. In that way, the game plays a little differently than other first-person shooters, which also sort of reminded me a little bit of Metroid Prime and how as you explore the game world, you'll obtain different platforming techniques that allow you to play through and explore the game world in different ways, and that's really, really cool. But the one thing I really want to talk about is the motion-controlled aiming. Again, but this time in reference to Metroid Prime. So, the way they handled it in Wolfenstein 2, I think it's the best it's been handled for any first-person shooter when it comes to motion-controlled aiming, and I can only imagine they're going to do things even better for Metroid Prime 4. And seeing how well it was handled with Wolfenstein 2, I think it's gonna be incredible for Metroid Prime 4. I think the motion-controlled aiming is gonna add a lot of speed, a lot of precision, and it's gonna feel really, really, really good, and probably be even more second nature for even more people. And I think it's gonna be special, guys. And it's kind of exciting having played through Wolfenstein 2, thinking about the possibilities and just how great Metroid Prime 4 is probably gonna feel. Now, one more thing I want to talk about is how Wolfenstein 2, while it may be the worst looking version on the Nintendo Switch, it is also simultaneously kind of a graphical showcase for the Nintendo Switch. It's a shooter game with sci-fi elements, and it does remind me of Metroid Prime in that way. Of course, the games have entirely different aesthetics, but when I see what they accomplished with Wolfenstein 2 on the Nintendo Switch, it gets me even more excited for what they could possibly accomplish for Metroid Prime 4. I mean, that game's going to be developed ground up for the Nintendo Switch. You're going to have, of course, the Nintendo devs on that, and apparently Bandai Namco may be helping. It's kind of a rumor, not 100% confirmed yet, but seems likely at this point. So, I can only imagine they're going to be able to accomplish even more than what Panic Button did with Wolfenstein 2 on the Nintendo Switch. But even looking at what they did with Wolfenstein 2 on the Nintendo Switch, it looks amazing. So seeing what they can accomplish with Metroid Prime 4, I think it's going to be great. And of course, like every other Metroid Prime game, I expect Metroid Prime 4 to be running at 60 frames per second. I think it's going to look and feel really, really good. So just sort of seeing all of the lighting effects and the lasers and the destructible environments and the fire and all of that, I get pretty hyped up to just sort of imagining what we're going to be seeing for Metroid Prime 4. It's just really, really cool. So then guys, those are my thoughts on Wolfenstein 2 and how I think it compares to Metroid Prime. I think if you're a Metroid Prime fan, you'll really enjoy how the game encourages exploration, finding more about the characters and the backstory of the world, and also you may enjoy how the game does have some different kinds of platforming elements just like Metroid Prime. And I think in that way it's kind of interesting and somewhat similar, but also when you play this game you'll get a better understanding of motion controls and how the game could look and run compared to, you know, Metroid Prime 4, and I think that's really, really cool. But, you know, as for Wolfenstein 2, as it is as a standalone title, and my final thoughts on the game, I think the story is amazing, it's incredibly engaging, I think the gameplay is very fast-paced, it's very fluid, it's also very, very challenging, so if you're into challenging shooter games with a great story, this is definitely the game for you. However, if you're looking for a multiplayer game, this literally is not a multiplayer game, so just pointing that out there. But also, you know, if this game, it may be somewhat short for you if you're not into multiple playthroughs and looking for all the nitty-gritty details. You may find that a 10 to 12 hour experience is just not worth it. But again, you know, this game is very challenging, multiple difficulties, there's a lot to explore, and, you know, there's different decisions that can be made, so every playthrough will feel very different. So if you're into multiple playthroughs in that way, this game has a lot of depth, and it's definitely worth it. So I definitely recommend Wolfenstein 2 for the people that for Metroid Prime fans or people who are into challenging games that have depth and incredible story, definitely check it out. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for listening and watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you all really soon. Bye.